After awakening, something changes in a way so subtle it almost goes unnoticed, and at the same time so deep that it transforms everything I thought I knew about myself. For so long, I imagined awakening as an endpoint, the triumphant arrival at an illuminated state where all doubts would disappear and life would finally become simple, clear, and definite. But no one tells the truth. Awakening is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of an entirely new path. And this is exactly where things become interesting. 'Cause what comes after awakening is not what most people expect. It is not eternal peace, nor constant euphoria, nor permanent light shining behind every thought. What comes after is more human, more profound, and, in a way, more challenging than any mystical experience. There is a kind of inner unveiling, a sensitivity that grows, a clarity that reorganizes everything from the way I perceive the world to the way I perceive myself within it. It is a return to the simple, but to a simplicity so vast that no one is truly prepared to encounter it. This is the space of the post-awakening. It's a space where the questions change, where silence speaks louder, where ordinary life becomes extraordinary. And this is what we are about to explore now. What really happens after awakening, and why no one is ready for this encounter with the deepest simplicity of existence. After awakening, something curious happens, as I realize, with an almost unsettling clarity, that everything I had spent years searching for answers, illumination, some kind of extraordinary revelation, was never hidden at all. It was never behind secret doors, nor in distant places, nor in grand mystical experiences. It was always right here, at the heart of ordinary experience, in the simple flow of everyday life. And yet, I couldn't see it. Not because it was difficult, but precisely because it was too simple. I was so busy searching for the extraordinary, so trapped in my spiritual expectations, that I completely ignored the fact that the extraordinary had been present in the ordinary from the very beginning. This realization arrives as a deep silence, an inner pause in which I admit, throughout my entire search, I was looking in the wrong direction. It's almost ironic. I spent years trying to discover the truth, and when it finally reveals itself, I understand it had been whispering behind every breath. For so long, I imagined awakening as a final destination, the illuminated endpoint toward which the entire spiritual journey was aimed. I believed that once it finally happened, I would be filled with a permanent sense of peace, clarity, and transcendence, as if life would suddenly become a constant state of lightness and total understanding. But when awakening truly happens, I realize that none of this is how it works. What arises is not an ending, but a beginning. It is not a safe harbor, but the start of an entirely new crossing. It's as if the ground I once believed solid opens beneath me, not to swallow me, but to reveal layers of life I had never noticed. And then I discover something even more disconcerting. I wasn't prepared for this, not because it is negative, but because it awakens in me a depth of sensitivity that dismantles the internal structures that once supported my identity. I understand that awakening is not about comprehending the world. It is about allowing the world to comprehend me, to pass through me, to transform me, and that, though beautiful, requires a surrender for which almost no one, including myself, is ready after awakening. One of the first things that surprises me is that nothing becomes more extraordinary. The world doesn't transform into radiant visions, nor into transcendent landscapes, nor into metaphysical phenomena unfolding before my eyes. On the contrary, everything remains exactly as it always was, except now I see, I truly see. I notice that the simple act of breathing, something so automatic I never paid attention to, carries a silent, almost sacred depth. The sound of water, the rustling of leaves, even the weight of my own body in space. Everything gains a clarity that doesn't come from the outside. It comes from within. It's as if the entire world had been redrawn, when, in truth, it was only my perception that had finally freed itself from the distractions that once kept it blind. I discover, with a mix of awe and humility, that the obvious is so vast that it had always gone unnoticed. And this is precisely what makes awakening so unsettling, realizing that what I sought in temples, books, and mystical experiences was hidden in the simplest aspects of daily life, not because it was too profound, but because I never had the courage to look without filters. And the more I perceive this simplicity, the more I see how life had always been trying to show me this. Every detail that once seemed banal now reveals itself as part of a greater dance that I ignored because I was too busy trying to find some extraordinary meaning. It's almost funny to realize that the very spiritual search, so intense and sincere, was exactly what kept me away from what I was looking for. I was so focused on reaching elevated states, on touching the transcendent, that I failed to notice the subtle luminosity that exists in simply being present. The return to the obvious is perhaps the most disorienting part of awakening, because it dismantles the heroic narrative of the spiritual journey. Nothing bursts into light. Nothing opens in the heavens. Nothing reveals itself as a cosmic secret reserved for the chosen few. What reveals itself is simply life, exactly as it is. And seeing this with complete clarity is so profound that it becomes overwhelming. This is why no one is prepared for awakening, not because it is complicated, but because it is far too simple for a mind that is always searching for the extraordinary. After awakening, something happens in a way so silent that it feels both subtle and overwhelming at the same time. The old identity begins to crumble. Not in a dramatic way, but like a sandcastle slowly dissolving as the tide rises. It's a sense of being a separate me, a small someone isolated inside my head, trying to control the world around me, simply starts to lose its foundation. The character I played throughout my life, with all its stories, its fears, expectations, and achievements, becomes strange, almost as if it belonged to someone else. It's like looking at an old photograph and knowing that it really happened, but realizing that the me in that image no longer holds the same shape. And yet, it's not an experience of disappearing. On the contrary, its identity dissolves, a sense of inner space emerges, an openness so vast that it feels disorienting. I realize that behind a me I spent so long protecting, there was always a silent background that never changed, a presence that had always been there, even when I believed I was completely lost. With the collapse of this identity, an unexpected question arises. Who am I then? And the answer doesn't come in words, concepts, or certainties. It comes as a presence, a quiet recognition that I am not the thinker of thoughts, nor the internal voice narrating my life, nor the social figure I learned to maintain. I am the space in which all of this happens. I am the movement of life expressing itself through me, and this understanding, although liberating, also requires courage. Because living without a rigid identity means accepting impermanence, means flowing with whatever arises, means no longer having a solid ground to stand on. This is where I understand why so many people fear this phase of awakening. It is not easy to let go of the comfortable feeling of being someone. Yet, at the same time, something inside me relaxes. I realize I no longer have to carry the weight of being a fixed identity. I can simply be. And for the first time, that being is enough. After awakening, returning to the ordinary world becomes a curious, almost surreal experience. The same streets, the same people, the same responsibilities. Everything is still there. But now, it feels as if I am seeing it all from a different vantage point. It's like watching a play your entire life and suddenly having the house lights turned on. I start to perceive human movement with new eyes. The rushed rhythm, the repeated worries, the conversations filled with urgency, the fears that trail behind people like invisible shadows. None of this is new, and yet now it becomes impossible not to see it. What once seemed automatic now reveals a choreography I had never noticed. There are moments when I watch people arguing over small things or stressing about something that tomorrow won't matter at all, and I realize how many years I lived exactly like that, trapped in narratives that were never truly mine. The ordinary world hasn't changed. So what changed was my ability to perceive its hidden depth, its involuntary comedy, its existential tragicomedy. This strangeness also affects me from within. Activities I once did on autopilot now seem to require a new kind of participation. Buying something at the market, responding to messages, talking about trivial matters. All of this takes on a different texture, not because I feel superior or distant, but because I see that daily life is filled with subtle layers I had previously ignored. I begin to notice how much effort people put into appearing right, strong, secure, when deep down, they simply want to be loved, understood, and accepted. And I realize that I was the same. Awakening shows me that behind every irritation, there is fear. Behind every demand, there is vulnerability. Behind every exaggeration, there is an unresolved pain. And when I see this with clarity, something in me softens. The ordinary world, with all its confusion, stops seeming trivial and becomes profoundly human. And within that humanity, I find a beauty I once never allowed myself to feel. After awakening, an almost irresistible impulse appears, the desire to remain in that state of clarity, presence, and expanded sensitivity. The experience is so transformative, so liberating, that a part of me wants to hold onto it tightly, like someone trying to preserve a precious dream before it fades upon waking. But I soon realize this is impossible. The more I try to maintain awakening, the more it slips away, like water flowing through my fingers. It's as if the very attempt to grasp the awakened state goes against its nature. Awakening cannot be sustained through effort. It rests in surrender. When I try to turn it into an achievement, it becomes a burden. When I try to preserve it as a spiritual trophy, it distances itself because it becomes something I seek to control rather than something I simply am. And this lesson is one of the hardest. There are moments when I feel I've lost awakening, that I've fallen back into old patterns, that the initial brightness has faded. But then I realize that this sensation is just another layer of the mind trying to control the experience. Awakening is not a fixed state. It is an ongoing recognition. It doesn't depend on ecstasy, intensity, or visions. It depends on the ability to relax into the flow of life. When I stop trying to hold on to it, it returns naturally, but not as before. It returns softer, humbler, more integrated into daily life. I come to understand that true awakening is not a burst of consciousness I must keep lit, but a way of being present that renews itself when I stop trying to control it. And, paradoxically, the more I abandon the need to hold on to it, the more it becomes part of me over time. I realize that the most delicate part of awakening is not the moment it happens, but the process of integrating it into real life. It is easy to feel awakened in silence, in meditation, in moments of deep contemplation. It is difficult to remain awakened in traffic, in arguments, in fears, in daily responsibilities. Integrating awakening means allowing this new vision to seep into the areas where the ego still tries to resist. It means observing my automatic reactions with gentleness, welcoming my emotions with honesty, and understanding that every scenario in life, both the soft and the chaotic, is part of the same movement. I begin to notice how old wounds reappear, not to punish me, but to be truly understood under this new light. Integration requires maturity, patience, and above all, humility. Humility to recognize that awakening does not make me perfect. It makes me aware. And it is precisely in this awareness that true change takes place. The more I integrate awakening, the more I stop dividing life between spiritual experiences and ordinary life. Everything becomes spiritual because everything becomes alive. I begin to see that my relationships, my choices, my words, and even my simplest habits are direct expressions of the degree of presence I carry within me. Integration shows me that there is no separation between the spiritual path and the human path. They are the same path. And it is here that I discover a form of peace that does not depend on silence or isolation or special moments. It is the peace that arises from the encounter between inner clarity and the real texture of life. A peace that does not eliminate challenges, but transforms them into opportunities to continue awakening. And this ongoing, unfinished process reveals that awakening was only the beginning. Over time, I realize that awakening does not turn me into someone who lives permanently in elevated states, nor does it bring about a kind of continuous ecstasy. What arises, in truth, is a silent lightness, almost invisible, yet deeply present. It is not the absence of problems, but the absence of the weight I used to place on them. Before, every small difficulty became an internal battle. Every thought became a dilemma. Every emotion became an obstacle. I see that all of this still appears, but in a different way. Emotions no longer trap me as before. Thoughts no longer define me. Fears no longer paralyze me. They arise, move through me, and pass, like clouds drifting across the sky, and I allow them to pass. This lightness does not mean disinterest or indifference. It simply means that I no longer carry the world as if it rested on my shoulders. Instead, I walk alongside it, within it. And for the first time, that is enough. This lightness expresses itself in small things: a spontaneous laugh, a softer breath, the ability to be present in a simple gesture without needing to turn it into something greater. It's as if life has slowed down, not because time has changed, but because my perception has shifted. The urgency that once guided me loses its meaning, and the need to prove something to the world dissolves. I begin to feel that living is not a task to be completed, but a dance to be enjoyed. And this dance requires no skill, no effort, only surrender. At this point, I understand that awakening is not an extraordinary event, but a gradual transition into a more natural way of existing. I stop trying to be someone and simply begin to be. And in that simplicity, I find a fulfillment that no external search ever offered me at this point in the path. I realize that awakening has not taken me to a place far from life. It has brought me deeper into it with more intimacy than I had ever felt before. Ordinary life, with its imperfections, repetitions, small joys, and small pains, becomes profoundly moving. There is something sacred in the simplicity that once felt boring to me. Now, even the most common moments carry a discreet beauty: the sound of a cup being placed on the table, the movement of people in the street, the smell of coffee in the morning. None of this has changed. What has changed is the way I touch these things, okay? And in this touch, there is a kind of quiet reverence. I begin to feel gratitude, not for grand events, but for the privilege of simply existing. It's as if each moment were a small, hidden celebration, not a noisy festivity, but an intimate recognition that the very fact of being alive is already extraordinary. This silent celebration does not mean denying pain, loss, or sadness. It simply means that they have stopped being enemies. They are now part of the same dance, different steps within the same rhythm. I realize that I no longer need to escape life, nor idealize a perfect state. I can simply participate with sincerity and presence. Awakening shows me that there is no final destination to reach, no static enlightenment waiting for me. There's only this moment, always this moment, and the way I find myself within it. And through seeing this, I feel something rare, a peace that does not depend on circumstances, an acceptance that requires no conditions, a love for life that needs no explanation. And in this quiet love, I discover that awakening, despite appearing to be something grand, is simply a return to what has always been true. I was already here. I have always been here. I just didn't see it.